Good afternoon and good morning. And thank you for joining us today on the second annual International SEL Day. I'm Jennifer DePauli, Senior Researcher with the Learning Policy Institute, and I would like to welcome you all to this virtual briefing on social and emotional learning policy to foster connection after trauma. I'm excited to be here with our co-hosts, Committee for Children, America Forward, Harmony SEL at National University, and Urban Assembly. Before we move into our programming, I want to open by talking about the impact of this past year on students and families, describe what research says about how we can pave our way forward, and highlight ways to leverage the American Rescue Plan to support SEL. The COVID-19 crisis that began 1 year ago this month has stretched many families to the breaking point, as many struggle with unemployment, the stresses of being confined at home, responsibility for both the care and education of children, and COVID-related illnesses. At the same time, young people are experiencing stress and trauma as they navigate basic needs and health concerns, a lack of connectivity to their school communities, and anxiety about the future. We know this from the CDC's reporting that mental health emergencies for children skyrocketed after COVID-19 hit. The pandemic has also further exposed racial injustice and exacerbated existing inequities, including those in health and safety, mental health, and educational opportunities. At the same time, students of color have also had to bear witness to our nation's racial reckoning and the persistent and devastating effects of racism against their communities. These multiple and ongoing crises are contributing to a collective and individual trauma that has deep implications for student mental health, wellness, and opportunities to learn. They're also causing many to reflect on how educational systems have contributed to societal inequities. And it has shifted attention to the essential role that trusting relationships and school-based supports play in creating the conditions necessary for students to learn and thrive. As educators rethink the school structures and practices for both the short and long term, and policymakers consider how best to support this work, they need to ask themselves two essential questions. First, how can we address the acute needs of young people and adults who continue to grapple with the dual impacts of COVID-19 and systemic racism? And second, how can we take this moment to advance long-needed changes to transform schools into nurturing communities that support students' social, emotional, and academic needs? To answer these questions, we should build on what we already know. For example, we know from the science of learning and development that academic, social, and emotional learning are interrelated and reinforcing. A large body of research has demonstrated the effectiveness of SEL for supporting students' academic and long-term success. We also know that young people with strong social and emotional skills are better equipped to cope with challenges, overcome trauma, and engage academically. And we know that the adults in a school building need to be socially and emotionally well in order to provide quality supports for students. Put simply, staff need training to successfully implement social and emotional learning. Educators with strong social and emotional skills are best able to navigate stressors and foster the positive learning environments that create the foundation for healthy learning and development. And maybe most importantly, we know relationships matter. Positive, supportive relationships build strong brain structure, buffer against adverse experiences, and are linked to better school performance and engagement. Even one stable relationship with a committed adult can help mitigate the effects of serious adversity. Being in a supportive community, including a virtual one, has even stronger effects on healing. Creating safe, supportive learning environments where students feel a sense of belonging and where relational trust prevails, and supporting students' social, emotional, and mental health must be at the center of summer learning experiences, school reopenings in the fall, and in every learning environment moving forward. So while the current moment presents significant challenges for educators, district leaders, state officials, and policymakers, it also gives us a chance to reimagine our education system. The federal government recently provided a record amount of funding to public education by passing the American Rescue Plan. State and local leaders must use these federal funds on evidence-based policies and practices to address the pandemic's impact on student learning. These federal fundings can and should also be used to make long-term systemic changes to our public schools. Each stakeholder at every level has a responsibility to create the enabling policy and instructional frameworks and devote the resources necessary to scale effective approaches to building relationship-centered schools. Policymakers in particular have this once-in-a-generation chance to help transform our public schools into places that help all students achieve their full potential. We must use the opportunity before us to rebuild in ways that create a long-lasting transformation of educational experiences, enabling all students to learn in safe, inclusive, and supportive environments. Environments where young people are known, nurtured, and healed, and are responsive to students' immediate and long-term social, emotional, and academic needs. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass it over to our moderator, Nithya Joseph from America Forward.
Thank you so much, Jen. A fantastic way to start this briefing. And thank you to all who are joining us for today's briefing, which we are absolutely delighted to host on SEL Day. I'm Nithya Joseph, the Advocacy Director at America Forward. Briefly, America Forward is a nonpartisan policy initiative of New Profit. Through a coalition of over 100 high-impact organizations working in communities across the country, we work to unite social entrepreneurs with policymakers to transform local impact into national change. And we recently launched a whole learner education initiative that seeks to advance federal policy to support the solutions, many of which Jen just laid out in her opening remarks. We are honored to co-host today's briefing alongside Urban Assembly, Harmony SEL at National University, Committee for Children, and the Learning Policy Institute. Over the next hour, you'll hear more about the power of social and emotional learning as a way to foster connection after trauma, and the critical role, as Jen just laid out, that policy has to play in advancing this issue. To start our event, we'll hear from Nick Yoder of Harmony SEL to provide a brief overview of social emotional learning. We are then honored to hear from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of New York's 9th District. Following those remarks, we'll engage in a robust panel discussion with Dr. Mary Helen Imardino-Yang of the USC Center for Effective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education, and New York City's Deputy Chancellor of School Climate and Wellness, LaShawn Robinson. We're then delighted to bring the student voice front and center in this very important conversation, with a moderated discussion from Urban Assembly CEO David Adams, with students Kiara Atkins, Luan Taveras, and Angela Amagon. And then we'll hear from Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio's 13th District, a champion for social emotional learning issues and SEL Day. We'll then conclude with remarks from Jordan Posamentier for the Committee of Children. We encourage you to engage with this briefing and throughout SEL Day using the social media hashtags #SELDay and #SEL. And as Jen mentioned, while this work has always been important, the pandemic underscored just how critical social and emotional learning is for all students, and particularly those who face systemic and long-standing structural barriers to opportunity and access. With that, I am delighted to pass things over to Nick Yoder of Harmony SEL at National University.
Happy SEL Day, everyone. I'm very thrilled to be here to give a quick introduction to social emotional learning. My name is Nick Yoder, and I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Harmony SEL, a pre-K to grade 6 social emotional learning program and Inspire Teaching and Learning, which is a pre-service and in-service on-demand professional learning series. So I'm going to start today to quickly go through what is social and emotional learning. And to do that, I'm going to really frame the conversation around the definition from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, who coined the term SEL back in 1994. So they define SEL as an integral part of education and human development. And as Jen mentioned, SEL is an inextricable link between academics, social, and emotional development that really promotes and encourages positive educational experiences for all youth. And it's also a critical ingredient to how we grow and develop as human beings throughout our lifespan. They also define SEL as a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy relationships, to learn how we manage ourselves and achieve our goals, both personal and collective. How do we build relationships with others and show our empathy for other folks? And how do we make good and responsible decisions? And so as you see what the outcomes are for SEL, we can see that it's critically important that students are engaged in intentional processes through these intentional teaching and learning processes to really support their development of core skills that they need to navigate their current experiences, their future experiences, both inside of academics, but also the way that they navigate their relationships, their healthy decisions, their careers ultimately in life, right? We all need these core social and emotional skills. One of the really great things about CASEL is they define these 5 core then competencies that promote social and emotional growth. And I wanted to highlight these 5 core competencies, as many states have used and leveraged these 5 core competencies to develop their own social and emotional learning standards and developmental frameworks for growth and development: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Recognizing that SEL is not just an internal process, but recognizing that it happens within context. They have these concentric circles that lift up ways in which we engage in social and emotional development. So we can engage in classrooms through intentional social emotional learning instruction, through programs and practices in a positive classroom climate, but recognizing that there's also ways in which schools can support the social emotional growth rate, ensuring that all adults within a building are able to connect and understand that human development nature of growth and development, particularly in relation to the intersection of social, emotional, and cognitive development. Recognizing, though, that we cannot do this in schools and in the education system alone, but we need authentic partnerships with families and communities, and recognizing the multiple contexts in which students learn and grow their social and emotional skills. And so it's really important to have those authentic partnerships as well as aligned learning opportunities to support the work. Then if you look on the left side of the figure, this really has implications for state, district, and schools. And Jen highlighted a lot of the really great work that needs to happen across these systems to be intentionally focused on social and emotional growth and alignment between these systems and how they are ultimately supporting human development and student development, right? So we need to be intentional about how we're defining these skills, right? Ensuring that we're using an asset-based approach and leveraging what we know about good development for youth to continuously grow and develop. As Jen highlighted, adults need to develop their own competencies. This is our growth, and it occurs throughout development across the lifespan. And so adults need spaces to process their own emotions, to develop and form their positive relationships. Then we also need to think about how we are supporting SEL for students and their growth and development, and how we're leveraging different activities throughout the day to support them, and using data to really support and guide our processes and implementation supports for youth. Then if you do that in a very intentional way and systematic way, a lot of research, over 20 years of research, has shown that there's short-term, intermediate, and long-term effects for kids, both in terms of their attitudes, their climate, academic success. Jen highlighted quite a few of these as well, right? And even thinking about long-term effects of an increased engaged citizenship, better college and career-ready success, positive mental health, reduced criminal behavior. All these really great effects really show when we're very intentional about our support for social and emotional development. So thank you for giving me 5 minutes of your time to give you a quick 101 on SEL. Next, we are honored to feature remarks for Congresswoman Yvette Clark, who is a strong advocate for the students, families, and communities of the 9th Congressional District of New York. Since coming to Congress in 2007, Congresswoman Clark continues to prove herself as a champion for all students and communities, evidenced by her introduction of the landmark legislation, the Dream and Promise Act, and serving as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Immigration Task Force, and co-chair on the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. We are honored to hear from the Congresswoman directly and the power of the SEL to empower young people to develop positive relationships, demonstrate empathy, and make responsible decisions. Thanks, everybody. Happy SEL Day.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Yvette Clark, and I proudly represent New York's 9th District, that's Central and South Brooklyn. Today is International SEL Day, and so I am honored to join you in discussing the importance of social emotional learning policy in fostering positive development within our youth. I'd like to thank the Committee for Children, America First, National University, Learning Policy Institute, and Urban Assembly for hosting this discussion on such a very critical issue. You know, it was Whitney Houston who sang, "I believe that the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside." And she was right. Children are our future, and our future always begins with today. Unfortunately, for too many of our children, they can't seem to find the beauty within. Far too many of them have faced hardships, no person, especially no child, should have to face. The challenges of this past year of the COVID-19 pandemic have placed a mental and emotional burden on our children that will remain with them for years and decades to come if we don't muster up the strength, the will, and dedication towards lifting it. We must do the work. I believe the practice of applied social emotional learning is and will always be the key to achieving that goal. We must make sure our children have the tools they need to manage their emotions, to maintain their relationships, to process all that happens in this crazy world we live in a healthy and constructive way. The shortcomings and limitations of online remote learning have deprived children of the critical connections to their teachers and classmates that they have needed to flourish through the developmental stages of their lives. Through social emotional learning, we can prioritize community and promote engagement. In this effort, we cannot leave any family behind, for within all children is the potential to better the world and further our people. Many states have begun doing the work they needed to do for the children who needed them the most, but not every state. For our children, I believe that comprehensive federal policy interventions are required to shift the paradigm and bring certainty and stability to our families and students in the midst of this crisis, so that no American child is forgotten because they reside in the wrong state under the wrong socioeconomic circumstances. This Congress, I introduced the Mental Health Services for Students Act of 2021. This bill would ensure broad access to school-based mental health programs for any child in need of help in overcoming their trauma. I believe that we have a unique opportunity, unfortunately due to the COVID-19 pandemic, to tend to the needs of the whole child and create a truly therapeutic environment for the sake of their growth and well-being. Policies like these and countless others stuck in the gridlock of Congress are the keys to a safer, more caring future. We need to make sure America's children have the resources they need to grow socially and emotionally. And while not every child will react the same way to experience trauma, we know that every child will face challenges. We need to make sure they're ready for their challenges and that they will inherit from us a world that is much greater than the world we inherited. If we do the work, they will. And I'm committed to uplifting this critical work on Capitol Hill to remain forever a faithful ally in fighting to protect our nation's children. Remember, we must remain in the fight for our children. If we don't, who will? So thank you so very much for listening, and many thanks to the host organizations for having me. Enjoy the remainder of today's event and do what you can do to heed the lessons learned on this International Social Emotional Learning Day. Let's get to work. Let's do this. And so, as we say in Congress, I yield back.
Thank you so much to Congresswoman Clark for her remarks and for her leadership in this area. We are truly grateful to elected leaders like her who work to advance these issues at all levels and the federal included. We'll now move into our panel discussion. We are absolutely honored to have Dr. Mary Helen Imordino-Yang and Deputy Chancellor LaShawn Robinson. And I'll do a quick introduction of both. Mary Helen, a former junior high school science teacher and award-winning researcher, is a professor of education, psychology, and neuroscience at the University of California and director of the USC Center for Effective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education. She studies the psychological and neurobiological development of emotion and self-awareness and connections to social, cognitive, and moral development in educational settings. Her work has a special focus on adolescents from low socioeconomic communities, and she involves youth from these very communities as junior scientists in her work. And now to LaShawn Robinson. With a long-standing career devoted to education, LaShawn Robinson is the Deputy Chancellor for School Climate and Wellness, leading the New York City efforts to provide such student support services as safety, social and emotional wellness, mental health, medical care, community school initiatives, and guidance counseling. LaShawn most recently served as Executive Superintendent of the Office of Equity and Access, leading Advanced Placement for All, the Dream Specialized High Schools Institute, and College Access for All Middle School. Welcome to you both. So I'd love to start off with a question, and both Mary Helen and LaShawn, please do come off camera. I'd like to start a question for you both. So, during this challenging year, we have heard again and again terms as SEL, trauma, and mental health named more than ever before. So my question to you, and perhaps Mary Helen, you can start us off, and then we can and pass things over to LaShawn. How has this heightened attunement challenged the notion of the average student? And how else can we concretely hope to support students and school communities around these very areas? Mary Helen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natia, for your kind introduction, and thank you to the attendees for dialing in this morning and thinking about these really important issues. I think what the pandemic has really lifted up into public awareness, although it was well known beforehand, is the deep structural inequities in our educational opportunities, and I think really central to today's theme, the essential social and emotional kind of experiential dimensions of a child's growth and development, and how critical those are to their ability to think well and to manage themselves in the world, to be productive citizens in a democracy like ours. What we're learning in the neuroscience research on adolescent and child development is really the incredibly strong interdependence, developmental interdependence between young people's well-being, their relationships, the way they subjectively experience the world and make sense of the things they witness on the one hand, and their brain development and thinking and academic development on the other hand. We've thought in the past about these as kind of separate, but what we're finding biologically and developmentally is that in the brain, they are the very same structures and systems that support both of these capacities, the social and emotional capacities on the one hand, and the academic and capacities for cognition on the other. There are not cognition areas of the brain and social and emotional areas of the brain. They are the same areas. So if kids are not supported socially and emotionally, they can't do well academically, and they can't manage their lives effectively and productively contribute to society.
Thank you, Mary Helen. LaShawn?
Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here representing the New York City Department of Education, the largest school district in the nation. I bring you greetings on behalf of Chancellor Misha Ross Porter, and it is an honor to be able to support our 1.1 million students, and happy SEL Day, everyone. This year we learned a lot. Mostly we learned that in this moment, we need to make SEL a movement. When COVID-19 hit in March of 2020, and we closed schools in New York City, we were keenly aware of the mental health implications for our young people. From our work in New York City during 9/11, and post 9/11 research indicating that 1 in 10 New York City students struggled with symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, we knew how trauma would impact our city's children. We knew that the pandemic and its corresponding health, economic, and social devastation would be a traumatic event for our young people, that we needed to provide support immediately and comprehensively. We knew young people would lose the consistency and predictability of school and classroom routines. We knew they would fear for their physical safety and the safety of family members and friends. We knew they would lose access to the valuable peer and adult relationships at school that sustain them. Our children were isolated from their peers, unsure of what was to come. Many of them were worried about their family members and communicated that early and often, including their frontline worker family members. Our young people were concerned about pending evictions due to job loss, or how a family of 8 would share a 2-bedroom apartment with not enough technology to go around and inconsistent Wi-Fi access. So these are real lived experiences from the field that we were dealing with and supporting our young people and families with in real time. So the COVID-19 pandemic reframed our understanding by magnifying the individual and systemic challenges that so many of our children and families are facing, and increased the urgency of response. COVID certainly introduced an unprecedented level of stress and trauma, but the challenges faced by many of our students and communities were not new, especially our low-income communities, especially our communities of color. Food insecurity, housing instability, lack of health care, structural racism, all issues that predate COVID-19. But COVID helped us to see very clearly that all students require a foundational level of social emotional support. We can no longer build social emotional systems that rely solely on a counselor or a social worker. This is the work that has to be happening in every classroom for every single student in our system, with additional support available for students who need more. SEL work must also be transformative, with a focus on transforming systems, and culturally responsive, responding to the needs of the students in your school community. That is the lens through which our district plans to continue supporting schools and communities. And this is why we know this is not a SEL moment. This must be a SEL movement and transformative in the work that we do.
Thank you, LaShawn. Those remarks about the fact that this is a transformative movement are resonant, that this can't be a piecemeal approach. This really has to be a comprehensive approach to thinking about the holistic needs of students and communities and families. So I appreciate that. And we're so happy to have the researcher and practitioner perspective through this conversation. And so thinking of that, the research perspective, Mary Helen, if we could turn to you, what do we know about the neuroscience, about the intersection of social, emotional, and academic or cognitive development? You touched upon this a bit in your opening, but would love to hear more.
Yeah, that's really the critical, contribution of the science right now, is this understanding, for example, when LaShawn talks about kids who are traumatized or who have had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder symptomologies, right? How does that actually impact their brain development and their ability to learn and to participate in a democracy as they grow older? And what we are learning from the science is that, as I suggested before, the interdependence of our emotional wellness and our social relationships and our cultural identities with our ability to think well and make sense out of the world using the academic tools that we acquire through school settings is absolutely impossible to overstate. So in the past, we kind of thought of social emotional learning as separate from our academic abilities and learning, like you kind of have, good students and good people, right? And what we're figuring out now from the data is that actually is not the case. Instead, when we look in the brain, the very same brain systems that are impacted by children's emotional states and adolescents' emotional states, adolescents turn out to be a very vulnerable population because they are undergoing such massive brain development across adolescence that the science is helping us to begin to appreciate. We never knew that before a few years ago because their brains don't get bigger, but they are rewiring themselves according to the way they make sense of the world. So these central core regions in the brain that are the seat of symptomologies like PTSD are the same ones that kind of make you go when you make a mistake, right? And they're also the ones that make you go when you're unsafe, right? And so when you're thinking about the learning process and you're engaging in actually doing a math problem, right? How do you follow along on that problem and think, oh, whoops, you know what I mean? Oh, I know how to do this, right? Those, oh, I know, or oh, whoops, those are the same brain circuits that refocus your attention on solving that math problem and on learning from the experience. Those are the same brain circuits that are involved in PTSD, which is basically a hyperactive system in your brain, if you understand what I get, right? So this gives you a sense of why a child who is feeling emotionally unwell, who's reactive, who's preoccupied with worries and anxieties for their family members, for their loved ones, for their communities, for themselves, cannot focus on learning the academic skills we need them to learn that are so pivotal for their ability to participate productively as adults in skilled work and productive work, right? That the very same brain systems that are involved in the physiological regulatory processes, the things that make your heartbeat speed up, the things that make you react to the world, are the same as the ones that support you in thinking. So if a child is not supported in feeling well, they're not capable of thinking. And this is actually a child or an adult, right? We're all human beings with these brain systems. If a teacher is not supported in feeling well, in being culturally welcomed into the space in which they work, into the culture of their profession and their school environment, then if they don't have skills for managing their own stresses and for thinking well about them also, it's impossible for our brains to focus on the academic and scholarly work that we need our teachers and students to be focusing on to be successful. So it really is a matter of understanding that these things are not luxuries. They're not just things that are the focus of children who are traumatized, and they're not just things that are the luxuries of children who have the opportunities to focus on them. But for the rest of kids, we really need to get down to work with the math, right? It's really about integrating these perspectives together in everything that we do that involves young people's developmental supports. And I can't overstate that enough, that these things are not separate. They're completely codependent in the brain, in our biology, in our genetics. And what this tells us is that the work that you do is incredibly important, and the ways that the federal government supports policies that actually put into place productive supports and training and opportunities for our professionals and for their families and children's and youth and communities is critically important to the success of our nation.
Thank you, Mary Helen. From the research, it's clear, and I'm sure, LaShawn, I saw you nodding your head from a practitioner perspective, absolutely. And oftentimes in policy, unfortunately, there is this false dichotomy when it comes to education policy between this, social emotional learning and academic on the other side, which is, as you said, I think resonant with practitioners and researchers is absolutely not the case. So appreciate you bringing that to light, and also calling the inequity that's inherent in some of our assumptions of who deserves what. LaShawn, if we could turn to you, you, as you said, leading the largest school district in the country, how do you define a positive and safe and supportive school climate in these remote times? And would love to hear any lessons learned or any practices that emerged from the last year plus that you hope will sustain.
Sure. Thank you for that question. We define a supportive environment as one that embodies safety and restorative approaches, one that emphasizes collaborative and trusting relationships amongst all stakeholders, that elevates students and families and ensures that they're present at the table, their voices are heard, and that they're part of the process, that we're working collaboratively with them. A school community that certainly prioritizes physical and mental wellness, and also anchors everything that we do in equity. This requires that students are welcomed and affirmed, and not just our young people, but all members of the school community should be welcomed and affirmed as their unique selves and given the space to tell the truth of their lived experience. It means that students are supported to develop a positive identity and know that they are comfortable when they need to ask for help if needed. Within my team, we've been talking about the ABCs of mental health recovery, which are very much connected to SEL competencies. And that's awareness, or ensuring that we are trauma aware, trauma informed, but with a lens on healing. And healing requires the entire school community to be a part of this process. So the work that we've done in New York City pre-pandemic really is a focus on each adult and how we show up in school communities in support of our young people. So we started an implicit bias initiative a few years back, really challenging educators to understand who we are, the biases that we have, and how, we bring our own lived experiences into classrooms and school communities. And to first start with adult SEL, or recognizing that the first system that we need to be aware of and understand is ourselves. So that's been work that we've engaged in prior to COVID that we will continue to engage in, because we find that to be a part of what it means to have a safe and supportive school community. The B is for belonging as part of the ABCs of mental health recovery, and really thinking through the fact that school is a community where young people should feel connected, where educators should feel connected. School community should say, I see you, to every single stakeholder within that school. Young people should see reflections of themselves throughout that school community, in curriculum, and activities that are designed, and pedagogy, the learning experiences, the way we go about our approach to the work. So that's really important to us. And our job is to respond to the lived experiences of our young people. And the C is for compassion, and really entering this space and with a sense of compassion and understanding for exactly what every single stakeholder in that school is going through during this time, and then creating the conditions and changing the conditions if necessary for high quality teaching and learning to occur. So when I think about all of those components, that's how we define a positive, safe, and supportive school climate during remote learning. And that's whether we're in brick and mortar or learning virtually. Those components are very important.
Thank you so much, LaShawn. I'm cognizant we have 2 minutes left. I think we could talk for another 40 minutes, but I would love to just close with, I think something that Jen from the Learning Policy Institute talked about at the top, which is that there is an incredible opportunity right now, given the federal move with the American Rescue Plan and this unprecedented funding, billions of dollars in supports to states and districts, and a set aside portion will be directed specifically to supporting students' social, emotional, and academic needs. So if you could, in 30 seconds, and LaShawn, will start with you, and we can hand it to Mary Helen. What's your advice to states and districts so that leaders can seize this opportunity to reimagine our education system and think about young people's development and adults, as both of you have touched upon, in a more holistic and meaningful way?
Wow, 30 seconds. We have to seize this opportunity. And as educators, we must fully consider the potential and possibilities that we have. In New York City, we're definitely pushing ourselves to think about the work in a more holistic and meaningful way. We're expanding community schools. In September, New York City will have almost 300 community schools. And community schools ensure that students and families have access to critical services, such as access to technology. Community schools address barriers to education that have been exacerbated by COVID-19, like food insecurity, housing instability, and community schools also address mental health and wellness. So we're leveraging that equity strategy. We're also increasing the number of social workers in our schools to provide direct support for our students with more acute needs. And we're really focused, and this is what I really want everyone here to think deeply about, is this opportunity to integrate social emotional learning and core instruction, or SEL academic integration. We will invest in building teacher capacity in SEL academic integration, learning best practices, and receiving consultation from local and national experts, and empowering teacher leaders and school teams to own this work in a different way. Standalone SEL programs that explicitly teach SEL, like Harmony and Ruler and RJ, restorative justice, they're valuable. And we will continue to prioritize that foundation, but we don't have to stop there. There's transformative power in going even deeper by integrating those practices into math, science, ELA, history, the arts, all content areas. And there's tremendous potential for young people when we think about SEL as a core part of our instructional model. And that's something that we want to deliver on daily in every classroom, every day.
Thank you so much, LaShawn. Thank you. Mary Helen.
I can second everything LaShawn said, and I'll add that this is a moment. This is a historical moment and an opportunity for innovation. And I like to think of this moment as needing and requiring what you might call a Copernican revolution, right? Changing the center of the solar system from the structures to the child's experience in that structure, and the adults who support that child's experience in that structure, and the rest of those structural elements orbiting around the sun of the experience of the people who the structures are meant to support. So what we really need to seriously consider is how we innovate across the curriculum, across professional development and supports for teachers and administrators, so that we build community-oriented approaches, just like LaShawn said, that support the experience of the people they're meant to support as the center of our universe.
Thank you so much. LaShawn, Mary Helen, thank you so much for the work that you do on behalf of so many communities and alongside them. We really appreciate it. And with that, it's a perfect segue to hear directly from, I think, the people that we care about the most, students. And so I am very honored to introduce David Adams, CEO of Urban Assembly, to lead us through a conversation directly with students.
Well, thank you, Nithya. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. I'm so thrilled to participate in this congressional briefing. I'm David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly, a model provider of data-driven school support solutions to a network of 23 public schools in New York City that serves more than 9,000 students annually. As a model provider, we provide schools and districts across the country with high-quality social and emotional learning, academic, post-secondary readiness programs, services, and supports. For this portion of the briefing, I am joined by a group of Urban Assembly students who will share their experiences and perspective on why SEL matters, especially at this time. I'd like to introduce us to our student panelists. Kiara Atkins of the Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts, Luan Tavares of the Urban Assembly School for Performing Arts, and Angela Amagon of the Urban Assembly Maker Academy.
Well, I'm Kiara Atkins, and I don't know if you can see, but me and Luan have on the same sweater. So we both go to UASPA, where education definitely equals options.
Welcome, Kiara. So tell me a little bit about your grade. I heard you go to the Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts. Where are you from? Tell us a little about yourself.
So I'm a 12th grader. So I'm graduating this year, and I am from the Bronx. And at the school, I major in theater.
Outstanding. Thank you. Welcome, Kiara. Luan, if you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what grade you in, and what school you attend, please.
Yeah, my name is Luan Tavares. I am originally from the Bronx, but I am now settled in Harlem. I'm also a senior, and like Kiara, I attend the Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts, and our slogan is where education equals option.
Outstanding. Well, welcome, Luan. I really appreciate you being here today. And let's move over to Angie. Angie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what grade you are, what school you attend?
Hi, I'm Angie. I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a senior at the Urban Assembly Maker Academy, where makers make it happen.
Well, makers make it happen. Well, we're here today to talk about social and emotional learning. We've heard from experts, we've heard from the senior leadership as in the Department of Education, and we've heard from policymakers, folks like Representative Yvette Clark. But now we get to hear from you guys. So, Angie, let's start with you. What does social emotional learning mean to you, and why is social emotional learning important now more than ever?
Well, social emotional learning means to me the interplay between our thoughts and feelings and how they lead to actions and how those actions lead to feelings. And SEL is learning about that cycle and is important because SEL gives us the strategies to check up on ourselves and others.
Wow. All right. Let's go over to Luan. Angie talked about this idea of the interplay between action, thoughts, and feelings. What are your thoughts about what social and emotional learning means to you?
So social emotional learning, what it means to me is really the exploration of like the self, really. I think what social emotional learning enables is focusing more on the individual in the role of a student. So I think it kind of takes that student idea or persona away, and it really focuses on the person who is kind of in that role. Um, and you start to, witness how it changes you when your background, your story, what you may be going through is valued in a classroom and things of that matter.
So it sounds like you're talking about here, you're not just a student in terms of what you're learning and what you're studying, but you're also a person. And social emotional learning helps you think about Luan, the person, not just Luan, the student. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's the most important things about it, how that difference is created. Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right, Kiara, we talk about thoughts, actions, and people. What are your senses? What does social emotional learning mean to you, and why is it important?
I would have to agree and add on to a lot what Luan said, like focusing on that person. I feel like social emotional learning gives you a different lens to see the world through. So instead of you being a student who goes to school from 9 a.m. to 2:35, you're not just that student, but you're also a person who after school has to go back home and also starts at home before going to school, and who also has friends and family and other like outside relationships that aren't just academic, which also all play a role into how you perform at school. So it's really just like zooming out to see what is all there for each and every student.
That's so helpful. It reminds me of what Dr. Mardina Liang said a little bit earlier, right? That the same parts of your brain that allow you to focus on math or science are the same parts of your brain that are processing emotion, that are taking into the social situations. So incorporating that all into one overall experience can help you solve the kinds of problems that you may need to solve as a young person. So let's stay with you, Kiara. You talked about this idea of the whole self. What's your favorite social and emotional competency, and how has it helped you to meet the challenges of COVID-19?
So my favorite SEL competency would have to be like self-awareness, really. I mean, you can't really go wrong with any of them, but for me, it's self-awareness.
Fair enough.
And like being able to take those moments to actually see or label or pin out like what are the things that I do that affect all the things around me, or how can I self-assess to tell other people what are the things that I need. Like, for example, well, for me, like if I'm in school and I know I'm having a hard time, like with remote learning, I am having a hard time. So I have to often, a lot of times, take a day to be like, okay, I need to figure out what are the things that I'm struggling bad with. Who can I go to let them know what I need to be more successful, even especially in remote learning? Because, like they were talking about earlier, we don't have that everyday feeling of like a schedule. We go into class, we get to see our teachers, talk to teachers. We don't have all of that now. Everything is virtual. So it's up to us a lot more to figure out what do we need, and then being able to go to those teachers and have them be there for us once we tell them what we need. So, yeah.
I appreciate that, Kiara. Let me take this over to Angie. Kiara talked about this idea of self-awareness, right? Being able to know what she needs so that she can express and communicate her needs effectively and access support from her teachers and peers of adults. In your experience, what has been your favorite social and emotional competency, Angie, and how has it helped you be successful in the context of COVID?
Yeah, so I have to agree with what Kiara was saying about self-awareness because I feel like self-awareness has really helped me as a student to really figure out what my needs are and how to communicate those needs with my teachers, especially with remote learning, having to balance your mental health and school. I feel like self-awareness helps me find that balance.
I appreciate that. And let's take this over to Luan. This idea of balance is what Angie talked about, right? Again, communicating her needs, but also mental health and balance. Where do my needs start? Where do other needs begin? So, Luan, what are your thoughts here? What has been your favorite social and emotional skill, and how's it helped you in COVID-19?
So I think my favorite social emotional skill is probably relationship skills because that's the one that I have been challenged with more.
Okay.
Especially, I don't know if that addresses your question because you said how it has helped you, but I feel like that's the one that I keep going back to on how to really enforce in this moment that we're in and being taught virtually, carrying our relationships virtually. So I feel like that's the one that I keep going back to and really dissecting that. Okay, how do I communicate as well effectively and also tie into self-awareness, like what are my needs, how do I communicate that with my teachers or other friendships. And yeah, that's the thing that I have been challenged with the most. And there's an upcoming break coming up, so I'll take that as an advantage to kind of start reconnecting with people more, since there were so many things going on around us last year and even until now. So yeah.
I resonate with that, Luan, right? Relationship skills, something I work on every single day. As CEO, one of the things I'm always thinking about is how do I develop and maintain relationships so we can make sure that we meet our mission and vision. So you got good company on this idea of continue to support your relationship skills. It's something that we all work on, and I'm happy to think about how you can do that over a spring break. So let's stay with you, Luan. You've been part of Urban Assembly's School for the Performing Arts now for 4 years, and you've gone through a program called the Resilient Scholars Program, which is the Urban Assembly's approach to supporting and organizing schools around the principles of social and emotional development. Can you tell me a little bit about how your school supports your social and emotional development and how you've used such concepts to help you solve problems, not only in your school, but also things like academics and relationships? So how does your school support your social and emotional development, and how have you used those skills to solve problems?
Yeah, so like you said, oh, can you repeat that again? I just had like a
No
mini brain
problem.
fart.
Talk to me about how your school has supported your social and emotional development, right? What are the
Mhm.
programs and supports that you do at Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts? And then have you used those things to solve problems?
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to participate in a program called Peer Group Connection.
Mhm.
That's really just helping out the freshman class really transform or like get used to our school culture. And I think that, you know, not only facilitating those lessons, I gain a lot from them, and I hopefully they gain a lot from me. So I think that's how my school has supported me, because in a lot of ways you see like once you're older, you see yourself in this freshman class, and it's like, oh
Those
my God.
youngins, right?
Yeah, no, no, but not that far apart in age. But and then it's just student on student, and that's what I
Mhm.
think is it has really helped me with just connecting with other students and how can I best navigate what issues they might be having, or what things I went through that you know can maybe inspire them and things like that. So I feel like through that program and really the school culture itself, it has really helped me with how to apply those skills into like a classroom setting and things like that.
Great, great. I appreciate that, Luan. Let me go over to Angie with the same question. How has your school invested in your own social and emotional development, and how has that investment helped you solve problems?
Yeah, I feel like at my school they really taught me how to problem solve and how like the skills needed to figure out my emotions and how to handle them. And I feel like with those lessons being taught to me, I'm able to problem solve more and like see it through a different lens
Mhm.
and really like ask how I am and how my peers are.
I appreciate that, Angie. And let me go over to Kiara. And Kiara, I'm not going to ask you the same question, but we are here on International SEL Day. So first, Kiara, happy SEL Day. But we've heard from policymakers, we've heard from folks who run the largest schools districts, we've heard from researchers. But I want to think about what you would tell somebody who says that SEL is just not worth investing in. What would you tell a congresswoman or a man who had to vote on a bill to increase funding for SEL and doesn't want to do it? Why do you think it's important to fund and support SEL at this moment? So, Kiara, I want you to tell folks who said, I just don't have time for SEL, why SEL needs to be prioritized. Why now? Kiara.
So I wrote her name down because she said something that I was really like, oh snap, that is exactly what I was thinking about. Her name is Mary Helen, but she was talking about how if we don't pay attention to those like, you know, emotional aspects and mental aspects of the students, like their mental and emotional development, we're going to lose them academically. So if we don't pay attention to those moments where they feel like they can't get through it and they can't process the things going on around them, they're never going to get the chance to go back to being their original, like efficient working self, to participate in all that math that you want us to learn and all that ELA you want us to learn, all of that stuff. It's not going to stick because we're worried about what's going on internally. You can't see what's going on internally. So if you don't take the moment to shine the light on it, we're not going to be able to, you know, be the students you want us to be.
Wow, Kiara, and you are going back and making sure you're using your active listening skills, right? And quoting one of our earlier researchers, Dr. Mary Helen Imardena Yang. So I appreciate you connecting your ideas back to previous conversations. And let me connect this idea to Angie. So Kiara, you talked about bringing her whole self, right? She said, we have internal things that are happening. Angie, what would you say to somebody who says, I don't have time to focus on SEL in schools. I got to teach math or science. What's your message to them?
I would probably tell them to rethink that because I feel like SEL helps us really, what Kiara said, focus on who we are as a person, you know? And I feel like if we're with teachers every day, we should be able to learn with them as they're teaching us, with that being our feelings. Like we should be able to learn about our feelings together and really focus on ourselves and the teacher and how we can help each other learn.
Well, thank you, Angie. And let me take it over to Luan. Angie talked about her feelings and making sure that we're in community with our feelings in schools to help us learn. Let me just turn this question one more time to you. I'm telling you, I'm a principal. I do not have time to invest in social and emotional learning. I got to get my test scores up. Luan, what do you have to tell me?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off what Kiara and Angela said is, I second that. And also like really rethink that, because I think in the midst of this, I know your last question was about COVID-19, but I think the pandemic has really shown that schools are either the students' first home, second home, or just like a very significant kind of organization in their life and things like that. And I think if we're picking up these skills earlier, we would be able to apply them more later in life. It's like learning a new language, right? It's easier to pick it up as a kid or like while you're younger rather than older. And I feel like that's gonna affect us as critical thinkers of the world, future leaders, and anything of that matter, or whatever workplace you really go into.
Well, I appreciate your response, Lon, and I want to appreciate all three of our students here today. Kiara Atkins from the Urban Assembly School for Performing Arts, Luan Tavares from the Urban Assembly School for Performing Arts, and Angela Amagon from the Urban Assembly Maker Academy. And if I could just have you guys remind me one more time of your school models. Luan, can you remind me what happens at the Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts? Education equals what?
Wait, let's say it together.
Oh, I don't know how this is gonna work.
All right, we're education
equals
option.
All right, outstanding. And Angie, I want to give you a shout out as well from the Urban Assembly Maker Academies. We're makers.
Make it happen.
Thank you all for joining me, and I hope you guys had appreciated the wonderful insights from our young people here in New York City who are telling us from their mouths the importance of social and emotional learning. So thank you guys all for joining me. And we're going to move now to introduce one of our representatives who have taken the same kinds of ideas that you guys have talked about and turned it into law and championed these concepts across the United States. So I want to introduce now Representative Tim Ryan. He is a relentless advocate for working families in Ohio's 13th district. Successfully reelected 9 times, he is serving in his 10th term. Congressman Ryan currently serves as the member of the powerful House Appropriations Committee, which controls the expenditure of money by the federal government. He is an outspoken advocate for SEL, recently penning a letter in support of SEL on the congressional record. Representative Ryan has introduced a variety of SEL and wellness legislation, such as the Teacher Health and Wellness Act, which would create a pilot study at the National Institute of Health aimed to reduce teacher stress, increasing teacher health, and ultimately boosting student achievement. Representative Ryan also introduced the Social and Emotional Learning for Families Act, or the SELF Act, which would increase the capacity of parents with teacher assistants to demonstrate and teach students and children social and emotional skills. We are thrilled to welcome remarks from Representative Ryan, and we thank him for his advocacy and support around social and emotional learning. Representative Ryan.
Hi, Congressman Tim Ryan here. Pleasure to be with you for this virtual SEL briefing. And I just first want to say thank you to all the leaders really who have been pushing social and emotional learning for a long time, really to address, the challenges, the trauma, the mental health issues, all of the things that have been issues for kids and teachers in our country for a long time. And you've been at it, and I see this as a major movement that's continuing to build itself out with all of your help. So thank you for that, because I can't think of a more urgent need for our kids than to make sure we're giving them and our teachers and our parents the tools they need to really be able to navigate the rapids today in our country: global pandemic, economic collapse, virtual learning, digital divide, public health issues, the economic stress for families, the high levels of uncertainty. Really, these are the tools. You are teaching and promoting the tools that can help our kids work through this. And they need it now more than ever, but within a crisis, there's always an opportunity. And the opportunity is really to implement these kind of programs across the board in the United States to give our kids a real advantage as they move forward. And there's a lot of money now that is getting down to the local school districts from the American Rescue Package. And so now it's as important as it's ever been to make sure that we're promoting this to the people of the country and to the leaders in the education system. So we're here to get your back. Always great to be with you all. I can't wait till we can be back in public again together, but keep up the great work. And my door is always open to help in any way that I can. So continue your great work. Thank you.
Jordan, your sound is not on, so you might want to. There we go.
Nithya, thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Jordan Parmentier here, struggling with the mute button. I would like to bring us just another 5 minutes to a close. I'd like to just first thank Representative Ryan for his remarks and for entering into the congressional record a statement of recognition of SEL Day. I want to thank Representative Clark as well, as we're truly fortunate to have them with us championing the cause. And also just a shout out to the Urban Assembly students, Kiara, Luan, Angela. You all give me so much hope. Thank you so much. So for just the next 5 minutes, let me share with you a little bit of where SEL might be hiding in federal legislation and policy. I think this will help us going forward to figure out where are we going to spend our time championing the cause over in DC. Let me start by saying there's a lot of active legislation, major legislation. You all know that the American Rescue Plan was passed, and I'll talk to you a little bit about where SEL is in there. But also let me draw your attention to the Learning Recovery Act, PATHS, and the Educational Equity Challenge Act. I'll share all this stuff with you afterwards, but let's quickly go through each one just so you know where SEL is and then where we want to think about it going forward. American Rescue Plan, very much like the last set of COVID relief investments from Congress, this is a place for you to look where states are going to have to hold back 5% of the money they get for addressing learning recovery, including evidence-based interventions responding to students' academic, social, and emotional needs. Same is true of school districts. They have to hold back 20% for that purpose. Now, this is the only bit that's passed. The rest of it's live and requires our attention. For example, the Learning Recovery Act. If it passed, it'd give $75 billion over 2 years to support school extension programs in districts with high percentages of low-income kids. The idea here is to address students who've been negatively or disproportionately affected, and that means academically, socially, and emotionally by the pandemic and school closures. When locals apply for this, they need to figure out and describe in their plan how they're going to engage families to address concerns around SEL and COVID-19 safety. It's great if it passes because it means PD for educators, paraprofessionals, other staff to address SEL and learning needs of vulnerable students. How about the PATHS Act? A lot of you have probably heard that high-dose tutoring has a strong evidence base for intervention to help kids catch up academically or keep thriving academically. PATHS Act is really interesting, and it gets a strong SEL yield on it recognizes that you get a strong SEL yield on academic outcomes. So it puts forth $500 million in competitive grants for teacher prep, K-12 schools and organizations to develop strong tutoring supports for high-need schools with low-income communities. In this case, applicants need to describe how their tutoring program will incorporate research-based SEL, along with trauma-informed practices, like we heard a little bit earlier today, and culturally and linguistically responsive practices. Moving on, I got two more for you. I got one last one for you. This one is educational equity challenge grants. This one recognizes that, and again, as we've heard here today, the challenges aren't going to be over even after the pandemic subsides. This will give a competitive grant upwards of $100 billion over 10 years to adopt evidence-based strategies around academic, social, emotional, mental, behavioral, physical health needs associated with the pandemic. 75% is dedicated to that. Another 25% is much more around innovative educator-initiated proposals on the same thing. And what's really important about this, it's designed for folks serving disproportionately higher percentages of high needs, low-income students, students of color, Native American students, homeless students, migrant students, students in foster care, English learners, students with disabilities, and students most affected by COVID-19. Now, let me just say that SEL has taken shape in way more legislation than the ones I just shared. To be sure, it's in several other pieces. I'll just list them off real quick. Strength and Diversity Act of 2021, Emergency Family Stabilization Act, Stronger Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, Strong Support for Children Act, Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act, and I want to give a shout out again to Representative Clark's Mental Health Services Act. But we don't have time to talk about them all. I was just able to give you highlights today. So when you leave here going forward, I want to impress upon you that SEL is a core part of healthy child development and well-being, as a key part of the learning equation, undergirds the success of a great many other domains about which you might also be interested. Here they are in front of you. You got student mental wellness, school safety, climate and discipline, career readiness and workforce skills, civics, teacher prep, PD, well-being. When legislation is before you, focused on these domains, take a moment and look for where SEL is showing up. And if it's not there, We're a phone call, a text message, or an email away to help you problem solve that in order to make sure it shows up and gets to where we need it most, which is with our young people. Here's a cheat sheet. I won't go over it. I'll just share it with you later if you need it. And now I'd like to hand it back to Nithya to bring us to a close.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And as you've highlighted, so many opportunities as we move forward in this unprecedented time. I wanted to just share deep appreciation to our panelists, Mary Helen and LaShawn, to our incredible student speakers for their expertise, and to all the co-hosts, Committee for Children, Learning Policy Institute, Urban Assembly, and Harmony SEL. Just a fantastic event. And thank you to all the participants who've been following along. We do encourage you, and for sticking around a few extra minutes, we encourage you to follow along with SEL Day, with these hashtags that you see here. Reach out to any of us at these organizations for further support as we work to transform and reimagine education system for tomorrow moving forward that is more holistic and more equitable for all kids. Thank you so much again, and happy SEL Day, everyone.